What if one signature on a piece of paper destroyed years of memories, dreams, promises, and sacrifices? Tonight I want you to stay with me until the very end because this story is not about divorce. It is about ambition, betrayal, loneliness, and the dangerous moment when success becomes more important than the human heart. People see powerful men and think they never break. They think money protects you from pain. But the truth is, sometimes the higher you rise, the more alone you become. Today I divorced my wife, and for a long time I convinced myself that I hated her. But what happened after those words changed my life forever. If you have ever loved someone, lost someone, or sacrificed your emotions to chase greatness, then this story is going to hit deeper than you expect. I remember the nights when my world was nothing but pressure, deadlines, fear, and impossible expectations. Everyone wanted something from me. Investors wanted results. Employees wanted leadership. The world wanted innovation. And in the middle of all that chaos, there was one person sitting quietly beside me, believing in me before anyone else did. She listened when nobody cared. She stayed when success was only a dream. But the strange thing about ambition is that it slowly changes your priorities without asking permission. At first you tell yourself you are working hard for your family. Then one day you realize your family has become secondary to your mission. I stopped noticing her silence. I stopped seeing the pain in her eyes. Every conversation became an argument. Every argument became distance. And distance is dangerous because people don't suddenly fall apart. They drift apart one ignored moment at a time. Then came the day everything exploded. The lawyers were sitting across the table. The papers were ready. My mind was cold, exhausted, and angry. I looked at her and all I could think about was betrayal, disappointment, and frustration. I told myself she never understood me. I convinced myself she was standing in the way of my future. So I signed the papers just like that. Years of memories ended with ink on paper. And after it was over, I said the words that shocked everyone around me. I said, I hate her. But the truth is hatred is often just pain wearing a RMR. People say those words when they are trying to protect themselves from heartbreak. Deep inside, I was not angry because she ruined my life. I was angry because I realized success had already ruined part of me long before the divorce happened. The first few weeks after the divorce felt strangely powerful. I buried myself in work, meetings, projects, late-night decisions. I told myself freedom was better than emotional attachment. I believed relationships only slow down ambitious people. The world praised me for being focused and unstoppable, but nobody saw what happened when the cameras disappeared. Nobody saw the silence waiting for me at home. Nobody saw the empty chair at dinner. Success is loud in public, but heartbreak is silent in private, and silence can become terrifying. One night, I walked into my house after another massive achievement, and there was nobody there to celebrate with me. That was the moment I understood something dangerous. Winning means nothing if there is nobody left who genuinely cares whether you win or lose. I started replaying old memories in my mind, the sacrifices she made, the moments I ignored. The times she asked for my attention when I stared at screens thinking the future mattered more than the present. I realized something painful. She did not leave because she hated me. She left because she could no longer recognize the person I had become. Ambition had turned me into someone emotionally unavailable. I was building rockets in my career while destroying the emotional foundation of my own life. And the worst part is that many successful people understand this feeling, but never admit it publicly. They lose relationships, not because they lack intelligence, but because they forget human connection requires time, vulnerability, and presence. You cannot replace love with achievement. No amount of money can hug you during loneliness. No business victory can repair emotional emptiness. One evening I received a message from her. It was simple. No anger, no insults, just honesty. She said, I never wanted your success to disappear. I only wanted to feel like I mattered inside it. That sentence destroyed me because for the first time I stopped viewing the divorce as a war and started seeing it as a tragedy created by two people who stopped understanding each other. Hate suddenly felt childish, heavy, meany, or endless. I realized holding on to anger was easier than admitting regret, and maybe that is why so many people stay bitter after relationships end. Bitterness protects the ego. Accountability challenges it. That night, I looked at my reflection and understood something most people learn too late. The world teaches us how to build companies, fortunes, and influence, but nobody teaches us how to protect love while chasing greatness. So today, when I say I divorced my wife, I no longer say it with pride, rage, or hatred. I say it with understanding because pain teaches lessons. Success never can. If you are listening to me right now, do not wait until the people you love become strangers. Do not become so obsessed with winning outside that you fail inside your own home. Ambition is powerful. Discipline is necessary. Greatness matters. But none of it feels complete when your personal life becomes emotionally empty. At the end of the day, human beings are not machines. We need connection. We need loyalty. We need people who remind us who we are beyond our achievements. And maybe the greatest tragedy is not losing someone you loved, Maybe the greatest tragedy is realizing too late that they were trying to love you while you were too distracted, chasing everything else. What if the moment that defines your entire life is not a victory, not a discovery, not a breakthrough, but a single decision made in anger that you can never take back? Imagine sitting in a room where silence feels heavier than words, where every breath feels like it carries the weight of everything you ignored for years. You're not surrounded by enemies, not facing a battlefield, but sitting across from someone who once believed in you more than you believed in yourself. And now that same person looks at you like a stranger. This is not just about separation. It is about the slow collapse of everything you thought was stable while you were busy chasing something you called success. The world outside might see confidence, power, and control, but inside that room there is confusion, ego, pain, and a strange emptiness that no achievement has ever prepared you for. You start convincing yourself that you are right, that you are justified, that distance was necessary, that emotions only slow progress. But deep inside there is a voice you keep silencing, a voice that asks whether winning outside was worth losing everything within your own life. Every memory begins to flash like fragments you never had time to process. Late nights when someone waited for you, conversations you dismissed, emotions you postponed, love you assumed would always remain, even if you never fed it. And then in a moment that feels both too fast and too slow, you sign something that ends a chapter you never truly understood while you were living it. You tell yourself it is freedom. You tell yourself it is strength. You even tell yourself it is necessary. But the truth hides beneath all those justifications. It is not freedom you are feeling. It is detachment. It is not strength you are showing. It is avoidance. And it is not clarity you have reached. It is emotional exhaustion disguised as certainty. And that realization is where everything truly begins to change. After that moment, the silence that follows is never really silence at all. It is filled with echoes of conversations you never finished, apologies you never gave, and emotions you thought would wait for a better time. At first, you try to continue life as if nothing has changed. You return to work, meetings, decisions, and responsibilities, convincing yourself that productivity will heal what emotion has broken. The world still applauds your focus, your discipline, your ability to move forward without hesitation. But behind closed doors, the structure begins to feel different. The same house that once felt like a place of return starts feeling like a reminder of absence. Even success loses its flavor when there is no one to share its meaning with. You begin to notice things you never noticed before. The quietness of meals, the emptiness of spaces that used to feel alive, the absence of a voice that once grounded your chaos. Slowly, memories stop being just memories and start becoming reflections you cannot escape. You remember moments where you were physically present but emotionally distant. Times when ambition made you believe that love could survive neglect, that patience was infinite, that understanding would never run out. But relationships are not built on assumptions. They are built on attention, consistency, and presence. And when those elements fade, even the strongest bond begins to weaken quietly without drama, without warning. You realize that the real damage was never the fire, now argument or the final decision, but the thousands of small moments where you chose something else over connection. The hardest part is not missing the person, but missing who you were when they were still beside you. Because somewhere along the way, you changed without noticing it. You became someone who measured life in achievements instead of emotions, someone who valued progress more than peace, someone who believed that love was secondary to purpose. And now, standing in the aftermath, you begin to understand that success does not automatically protect you from loneliness. In fact, it can amplify it when shared happiness is no longer part of the equation. Then comes the stage you never prepare for, the realization phase where denial slowly loses its strength and truth begins to settle in without permission. At first, you resist it. You tell yourself you did the right thing, that emotions are temporary, that time will validate your decision. But time does not always validate choices. Sometimes it exposes them. You start noticing how often your mind drifts back to moments you once ignored. Not the big arguments, not the final breakdown, but the small quiet details. The way someone used to check on you without being asked. The way concern was expressed without words. The way presence alone used to make difficult days easier. And suddenly those details become louder than any achievement you have recently earned. You begin to question things you never questioned before. Was it really incompatibility, or was it neglect? Was it misunderstanding, or was it absence? Was it truly about her, or was it about how much of yourself you were willing to sacrifice for something you called purpose? These questions don't come all at once. They arrive slowly in moments when the world is quiet and your defenses are low. You try to distract yourself with work, but distraction no longer feels like escape. It feels like delay. Because no matter how far you run into responsibilities, your thoughts still find their way back to what was lost. The strange part is how success continues outside while emptiness grows inside. People still admire you, still follow your decisions, still see strength in your silence, but they don't see the internal conversation that never stops. The debate between pride and regret, between justification and truth. You realize something or uncomfortable. Being right does not always mean being at peace. You can win every argument and still lose something far more valuable than validation. And as this realization deepens, you understand that some losses are not loud or dramatic. They are quiet transformations of your inner world. They change how you see yourself, how you interpret love, and how you measure what truly matters. And in that quiet shift, you finally begin to see that the most expensive cost of ambition is often not failure, but emotional distance that cannot easily be repaired. After realization comes reflection, and reflection is where the mind becomes both the courtroom and the judge. You start replaying everything with a different lens, no longer from the perspective of ego, but from the perspective of consequence. Every moment you once dismissed begins to return with new meaning. The conversations you cut short now feel unfinished, in a painful way. The silence you once ignored now feels like a signal you should have understood earlier. And the decisions you made in the name of ambition no longer feel as clean or justified as they once did. Instead, they feel heavier, layered with emotions you did. I don't allow yourself to process at the time. You begin to understand that relationships do not collapse in a single moment. They weaken through repetition, through repeated absence, repeated distractions, repeated emotional unavailability. It was never about one argument or one disagreement. It was about a pattern of priorities that slowly shifted without acknowledgement. Work became urgent, dreams became dominant, and emotional presence became optional. And while you were busy building a future, the present quietly started slipping away without resistance. That is the part that hurts the most. The realization that nothing dramatic destroyed it, only neglect disguised as responsibility. In reflection, you also begin to see your own contradictions. You wanted support, but did not always give attention. You wanted understanding, but did not always listen. You wanted patience, but did not always show presence. And yet you expected the relationship to remain stable through all of it. That imbalance becomes impossible to ignore once you are forced to sit with it. Honestly, it is not about blame anymore. It is about awareness. Awareness of how easily ambition can distort emotion. Our priorities when it is not balanced with self-awareness. And slowly, reflection shifts from accusation to acceptance. Not acceptance of loss, but acceptance of responsibility. Because you begin to understand that some endings are not accidents of fate. They are the result of consistent choices made over time. And in that understanding, something uncomfortable but necessary begins to form. The recognition that healing starts not by rewriting the past, but by finally seeing it clearly without excuses or illusions. Then comes the stage where silence turns into growth, not because the pain disappears, but because you finally stop running from it. At first it feels unnatural. You are used to distraction, used to filling every empty space with activity, used to escaping your thoughts through work, noise, and constant movement. But now there is no escape that truly works anymore. The memories remain not as punishment but as reminders that force you to slow down and understand yourself in a deeper way. You begin to sit with your emotions instead of avoiding them. And that is where the real transformation quietly begins. You start noticing patterns in yourself that were always there but never acknowledged. The need to control everything. The belief that productivity can replace emotional presence. The assumption that love will survive without attention. These were not sudden flaws. They were gradual habits built over time in the pursuit of greatness. And now, in the absence of what was once stable, you are forced to confront them honestly. Growth does not come from denial. It comes from uncomfortable recognition, and that recognition is often painful because it does not allow you to remain the same person you were before. In this stage, you also begin to redefine strength. Earlier, strength meant endurance, success, and emotional suppression. But now, strength starts to mean something different. It becomes about accountability, emotional awareness, and the ability to admit where you went wrong without defending it. You realize that true strength is not just building empires or achieving milestones. It is also maintaining the relationships that give those achievements meaning. Without that balance, success feels incomplete no matter how impressive it looks from the outside. And slowly, something shifts internally. Not instantly, not dramatic or Ellie, but quietly. You stop seeing the past as something to fight against and start seeing it as something to learn from. Pain becomes information instead of identity. Regret becomes guidance instead of punishment. And in that quiet transition, you begin to understand that growth is not about forgetting what broke you, but about learning how to become someone who no longer repeats the same breaking patterns again. Finally comes acceptance, the stage where you stop trying to rewrite the past and start understanding it as part of who you have become. It is not a moment of celebration, nor is it a moment of complete healing. It is quieter than that. Acceptance does not erase pain. It changes your relationship with it. You no longer argue with what happened. You no longer try to justify every decision or blame every outcome. Instead, you begin to see the full picture, your choices, your priorities, your blind spots, and the emotional costs that were never visible at the time, but are now impossible to ignore. In acceptance, you understand that some endings are not failures, but consequences, not punishment, but reflection of imbalance. You stop asking who was right and start asking a what was missing, and often the answer is not something external. It is presence, attention, emotional availability, and time, things that are simple in theory but easily lost in the pursuit of larger goals. You realize that ambition is not the enemy. Neglect is success is not the problem. Disconnection is. And when those two are not balanced, even the strongest foundations can weaken over time without dramatic warning. There is also a strange kind of peace that begins to form here. Not because everything is fixed, but because you are no longer resisting truth. You accept that you cannot go back and change what was said, what was done, or what was lost. But you also accept that understanding it deeply is the first step toward not repeating it. Acceptance gives clarity where confusion once lived. It removes the constant internal conflict between ego and regret, replacing it with responsibility and awareness. And in this final stage, you begin to see something important. Life does not only judge you by what you achieve, but also by what you sustain. Not just what you build in the world, but what you preserve in your relationships. And as this realization settles, you finally leave. That acceptance is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of living differently with the truth you now cannot unsee. In the end, what remains is not the divorce, not the words spoken in anger, not even the success that once felt like everything. What remains is understanding. A quiet, uncomfortable, but honest understanding of how easily a life can split into two directions. When ambition starts moving faster than emotional awareness, you realize that the story was never just about losing a partner. It was about losing balance, about choosing progress so intensely that presence slowly became optional until it disappeared without you fully noticing its absence. Looking back, it becomes clear that no single moment destroyed everything. It was a long sequence of small decisions, repeated priorities, and silent neglect that slowly changed the shape of the relationship. And by the time you noticed the distance, it no longer felt like something you could simply fix with words. It had already become a consequence of time, habits, and emotional disconnect.